Hey guys, welcome to Ashton Tracy Horologist. What are we talking about today? Today we're talking about numbers, specifically timing results. And the movement in question is going to be a 61:39. Now, some of you may notice there's a couple of wrong screws in this movement. Don't worry about that. It's going to be rectified with the correct screws. I just haven't got around to doing it yet. So, when it comes to timekeeping, there's a few things that we need to take into account. We need to take into account the amplitude, we need to take into account the numbers, the positions, etc. Now, we all know Seikos traditionally have a low amplitude. They were designed this way. They were designed to work with a low amplitude. I've seen numbers thrown around. I think Adrian mentioned to me that it's Seiko said 180 at full wind was acceptable. It's a little low, in my opinion. I'm not sure if that was in the horizontal or the vertical. I would assume that would be in the vertical, but it could have even been in the horizontal. I'm not really sure. But anyway, the point is, today we're going to look at what you can actually expect from your vintage Seiko. What kind of timekeeping can you expect? Well, let's have a look at this 61:39. We've got all our parameters set. We've got our lift angle set to 54. It's actually 54.5, but for the purposes of my machine, we can't do half degrees, so we're setting it a little low at 54. Now, I don't know how many positions Seiko suggested that a watch be timed in. I know, a lot of vintage watches, Swiss watches, perhaps vintage Omegas and things, Omega specified they would be tested in 3 positions only. Those positions would be dial up, dial down, and crown at 6 o'clock, the position you'd be walking in with the watch. So, I don't know how many positions Seiko timed their watches in. I'm assuming it would be 3, but I'm going to test it over 5 positions because I test all watches over 5 positions. Now, what can you expect and how do we actually interpret these timing numbers? Well, when we bring our watch into position, we give it time to settle. So we'll bring it into the dial down position and we'll give this watch a little time to settle. Now, a lot of you will be looking at those numbers, looking at that amplitude and thinking, wow, that's a pretty high amplitude. Now, it is a pretty high amplitude. You'd be correct. Now, I'm actually experimenting with the 2892 ETA mainspring in this. There's been a lot of talk on Wrist Sushi about using these mainsprings and seeing how they work, and I've decided to give one a go. So there's a new mainspring in this watch, but perhaps the biggest way that I get these numbers up is by a little tweak of the pallet stones. I have a trick, which is a fairly common trick amongst watchmakers, is to make the depth of the lock of the pallet stones a little shallower than it is. Traditionally, I would say they're quite deep on vintage Rolex movements. So I move the stones in ever so slightly, and that really does give us a few more degrees of amplitude moving those stones in. You have to be careful that they don't mislock, because when it drops onto the stone, you want it to lock on the locking face, not the impulse face. So we need to just bring those stones in a little bit. So we can see that in our position here, we have amplitude of 250, which again is pretty high. And we have a gain of 15 seconds a day. So it's good to give it some stabilization time to get to the right figure. Now, more modern machines will actually take an average and they'll spew out a number after, say, 2 minutes. And that's actually a machine I'm purchasing quite soon. But for the purposes of this, we'll write it down. So we can see in our dial up position, we have plus 15 seconds. That's what we can call it. We do fluctuate, we do change, but our average seems to be around plus 15 seconds. We're getting a little lower now, but that's what we're going to leave it as. Now let's move into our dial up position. our dial up position, we should see a pretty similar result if our hairspring is flat. If our hairspring isn't flat, if it's up to one side, if it's domed like an umbrella, we're going to see different numbers. But if our hairspring's relatively flat and our amplitude, our balance end shake is good, we're going to see relatively similar numbers there. A little change of beat error, it's nothing too much to worry about. And we'll just let it stabilize, and then we'll kind of see what our numbers are. We're getting a little bit of interference there from my voice, picking it up in the background. So we can see that our amplitude is starting to stabilize and our rate is starting to stabilize. So again, we're looking at around plus 12, plus 11, plus 13, plus 14. So we'll let it settle, and we'll look, and we can see what we're going to be. Going down to plus 9. Rate's moving a little. Plus 10, plus 8, plus 10, plus 11, plus 9. I'm going to call it plus 12. Actually, let's call it plus 11. It seems like it's more in that range. All right, now let's go to our crown down position. Now we are going to see a drop in amplitude in our crown down position, and this is to be expected. It's because we're getting more friction throughout the watch, and therefore the balance amplitude is going to be lower. Now the reason we get more friction is because when the watch is in the horizontal positions, we have the tops of the pivots are just touching on the watch, on the gear train. Now we have the sides of the pivots touching. There's a greater surface area on the sides of the pivots, same for the balance pivot, pallet pivots, train wheel pivots, and so forth. So we're going to see a drop in amplitude because of this. So let's let our amplitude settle. We're probably going to settle around 230. That would be my guess. Yeah, that would be my guess. Plus 8. We're looking like we're sticking around plus 8. Plus 9. So for this exercise, let's call it plus 8. Now let's move into our crown left position. Crown right, I'm never sure. It's this position with our hand on the bench with our watch like this. Now let's see what kind of rate we get here. Now immediately we see a larger increase in rate. Now, this is going to be a number of factors. This is going to be perhaps our balance spring is not perfectly concentric. That could be the case. But remember, we're always dealing with tolerances here. We're dealing with a watch that is not made as a chronometer. It's not made to the same specs. And what we really want to do with this exercise here in this video is see what kind of timing results we can get from a quote-unquote low-grade Seiko movement compared to a Swiss watch, perhaps a vintage Omega of the same period of time. So here we have our amplitude settling in at around 230, and we have a gain that's looking around 25 seconds per day, 25 to 28 depending. So let's put it at plus 26 seconds. Let's now move to our crown up position, which is the fifth position, the fifth and final position that we're going to test our watch in today. So let's let everything stabilize. And we can see our amplitude's around 225, which is good. Our drop isn't too good. We can expect anywhere between up to a 30 to 40 degree drop in amplitude when we change positions. So here we have about a 25 degree drop, which is fantastic, which means we don't have too much friction running through our gear train. So we're looking at around 22 seconds consistently. So let's put us at plus 22. Now it's important to note that timing tolerances and measurements should be checked the day after the watch is serviced. Amplitude is going to climb. It takes time for lubricants and things to settle in. So we are going to want to wait till the following day to time our watch fully before it goes out. So we know that everything's correct. So let's look at our numbers. We've got plus 15 and plus 11 in our horizontal positions, plus 22, plus 26, and plus 28. Oh, sorry, plus 8 in our positions. So let's do some quick math and figure out what those numbers mean. So let's look at our numbers. When we add up all our numbers together, we get 82. That's adding up all our positions here. We come to the figure of 82. We now need to divide 82 by 5 because we're testing over 5 positions. That brings us to an average gain of 16.4 seconds per day. Now, clearly, we can bring that number down by regulating this watch. If we regulate this down to plus 5 seconds, everything else falls in line with it, and we get a much smaller delta. We can get a gain of around 5 seconds, a much smaller number, sorry. We can get a gain of around 5 seconds per day with this watch, with really not too many issues. Now we have an 18-second difference. That's the greatest difference between the 5 positions. Now, if we head over to the computer and look at Omega's timing tolerances, what's interesting about this, let's look at test 26. Test 26 is for an Omega 500 series movement, perhaps an Omega 550, 565, whatever it may be. A fairly high grade movement in a vintage Omega. Now, we can see number of test positions, 26, 3 test positions, but we've tested in 5. Now we have a target rate of plus 9 second gain per day, okay? Now our target rate, we can get our target rate of our Seiko 6139 down to plus 9 seconds a day, no problem. Because again, we just regulate down and all our numbers fall back in line when we divide by 5. Now remember, we're only dividing by 3 positions here. And what's our delta? Seconds per day, number 26. It's 30 seconds. What was our delta? 18 seconds. So we can really see that the Seiko 6139 is a movement that really can perform quite well compared to vintage Omegas and other watches. So we often hear a lot of people say, well, not so much these days, but really, should I really put money into servicing this watch? It's just a Seiko. Well, the numbers speak for themselves. The numbers are fantastic and the watches can run so well. It's unbelievable really for the price point that they're worth. So I hope that gives everyone a little bit of an idea on timing. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. If you have any comments, please add them. And if you have any ideas of videos that you would like in the future, you can either send me an email or you can put it in the comment section. And I'm more than happy to produce content based on exactly what you guys are after. So hope you guys have enjoyed. Please subscribe to the channel. Please check out my Instagram, Ashton Tracy Horologist, and check out my website as well. Thanks guys. See ya.